And we have begun.
Hey everyone, we're back. Another MMT podcast. So today we're just gonna talk about the issue I want to start off with. It's not about the specifics of MMT or the theory. It's assuming there is some uncertainty about the validity of the theory. Sorry. Yeah, assuming that just even if I understand that it works, even if people understand that the framework broadly work, would they trust enough? Sorry, I'm getting distracted. Would they trust the profession of economics enough to say that system should be accepted more broadly? And will they trust political institutions enough to say that
I see why you're asking this, because I wouldn't.
Be applied in a way that makes sense?
Like I was telling you last night, like
Right.
I would, so like in a crisis like this, I would condone, if I were supreme leader or something or had veto power, I would totally condone like, just print money, whatever. People's lungs are melting. Do it. Print money, do crazy stuff that maybe will cost us a lot later. But that, in my head, that was like temporary MMT. And then later we have to pay that back somehow. We have to like burn that money, or we have to make a bunch of stuff that quickly, because we didn't make it during that period where we were just like telling people it's like a loan, right? You print a bunch of money, it sort of feels like you're taking a big loan on the future, or a loan on every product that exists right now. You're devaluing it all. But it's maybe we aren't actually in that much in dispute, because it sounds like your views of MMT are, if it's like MMT is a theory about when it is okay to print money, and obviously if I'm able to say sometimes, like a crisis, maybe it's okay, then there is some time in the universe that it's okay to do that. Therefore now it's just it's kind of the like, ma'am, will you have sex with me for $1 million? And she says, maybe. And then he says, will you have sex with me for $100? And she says, what do you think I am? And he says, we've already established what you are. Now we're just haggling over the price. Right. So there is like, once I've admitted that there's somewhere I'm willing to like, fine, whatever, run the money printer, go burr, because my grandparents mean more than the economy. If I'm willing to say that at one point, then maybe there's other circumstances like a crisis of smaller proportions than this, where I would or just in general, maybe we'd find some corner of the universe where money printing arbitrarily is actually okay. I don't think that exists. It doesn't sound like it does, but I'm open to it now because we've established what I am. Now we're just haggling over the point where I, you know what I mean? Yeah. All right. Anyway, so let's start there.
Yeah. I guess one thought that comes to mind is, okay, somehow it feels to me like in the MMT world, what was I gonna say? I'm kind of high.
That's all right.
Like it's okay to print.
That's the best excuse ever. Right? That's fine.
Part of the idea is to like it's okay to print infinite money. Is that right?
Well, I can tell you from a physics perspective that is physically impossible. But anyway.
It's less infinite and more like indefinite.
Right. No, there is a difference. Print money.
Okay, so how much?
Yeah. What is Edwin? I think Edwin, can you check if your phone is having the same problem that it had yesterday? Edwin, can you check to see if your phone is having the same problem? Are you guys all seeing him cut out?
Yeah. He's like totally
Edwin,
robotic.
I think it's on.
There are constraints. It's just
He's still talking, but he's left. That's great. All right.
I just want to comment that I think the fact that me and Mike have done exactly opposite things regarding our hair is totally in lieu of our political disagreements here. So
that's true. I just let mine grow, except I always have someone cut. I don't do it myself, but because then I would just screw it up. But I wanted get a mullet.
I wanted to have the same lush beard that Paymon has going on, but the problem is that the masks just become too uncomfortable, and I actually spend quite a bit of time outside.
That's why you need a big full face respirator. Yeah.
How much lighter is your face without a beard?
Way lighter, dude.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you fly?
Edwin,
almost.
On and off, Edwin. I think you're still cutting out. Can you check to see if it's the battery like last time?
Oh, he just needs to check his chat.
Oh, what's going on in the chat?
I chatted.
You've been chatting?
Well, yeah.
Wait,
sometimes it's just a better way to communicate.
Your connection sucks. Edwin, you're not coming through. Yeah, I can hear you say, can you hear me?
See, this is why we need fucking MMT, all right? Liberia needs to update its fucking internet infrastructure.
Yes.
And the only way they're going to be able to ever get the capital is by just straight up, like, just funding it, all right? Like, just...
Liberia, modern monetary...
You're the first person to ever Google search this.
Yeah, it might be. I frequently...
All right. Oh, wow. Edwin might be like 90% of the Google searches in this context.
The Greeks and Romans tried it. Oh, boy.
Can you hear me now?
No, Edwin, you're still choppy as hell. Did you check to see if it's the...
Has he tried to restart yet?
God.
Dude, just kill your app and join back in again.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
You're not still using the Chromebook, are you? Oh, that's the problem. On the Chromebook, what you do is you go to the Android store and you can install apps that you would normally be able to install on Android. You can install them on Chromebook. That's what he's got to do. Cool. I should have told him that while he was still on. Let me message him. But anyway, so is there something I can look up to entertain our millions of adoring fans?
Yeah, okay. So if MMT doesn't worry about infinite money, then how long can the debt grow for? Like, what is the maximum amount of debt?
It's indefinite.
It's the carrying capacity of... Oh, don't just...
No, but what's the maximum?
There is a physical limit.
I'm not asking how long, but how big.
Like, if you want to get super theoretical, that's more of a problem relating to just economic growth, broadly speaking, right? So, like,
yeah, I don't think even without debasing the currency or money printing, like, there's necessarily a limit, because if the money's inflating anyway.
Edwin, same problem. Sorry.
No.
Fuck. Well, you guys might just have
It's good. It's good. It's
like
good.
$1 trillion
You're good now, I think.
It would be unthinkable to someone in 1920.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so it's some multiple of the productivity.
Well, because Paymon, you gotta connect the money supply to economic growth. Like, these things are not mutually exclusive, right?
Money supply isn't the same thing as debt, though.
Right, but they're related. Like, if you the question you're asking is, I might not be understanding you, but if the question you're asking is what is the limit of the growth of the money supply, the answer is just the growth of our economy. And like that, and look, there are legitimate questions there, right? Because you could ask, as Paul said, there's actual physical limitations to our ability to grow infinitely, right? So we literally can't grow infinitely.
Starting with just the combinatorial number of atoms available in the universe.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you could get hyper theoretical like that, and then maybe you can make some argument about capitalism.
Less than infinity.
Yeah, I'm not saying capitalism is perfect.
Right, but I'm saying you could turn, like, I would turn that argument more towards the economic system that we've adopted, right? So like if like, if you hear this from environmentalists, right? They'll say something like, a growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of a cancer cell, right? And in that sense, yeah, like I would probably agree with you in principle that there is probably some limit, but the question of the limitation, I think, is ultimately a political one and a philosophical one, not really so much even a question of like how the economy works. Does that make sense?
So if we accidentally go past this limit for too long, might something bad happen?
I mean, yeah, probably.
Surely no.
I mean, global warming is a thing, right? So,
right. Okay. So then we have to be able to accurately gauge what the limit is.
yeah, I agree.
Okay. And yeah, I don't think we can accurately gauge that yet.
I also agree with that.
So then what do you actually know? You're just guessing. It's all guesses.
Oh shit.
I mean, basically, it's not guesses in the sense of like, it's not guesses in the sense that we're just kind of like throwing darts into
so what,
a thing, but it's more like
so
nobody empowers
know,
addressing the fact that in order to sustain our economic structure, we have to have basically boundless growth. That's not something that's really being addressed in a mainstream conversation.
Well, I point out that it's absurd occasionally, but that's just me.
I mean, you're smarter than most then, so.
Oh, thanks. That's scary. In fact, that's downright disturbing.
And that's actually the problem that I have with mainstream economics, because they don't really posit these underlying more philosophical concerns. They just kind of go, well, in order to have XYZ amount of GDP growth, you just got to do XYZ policies. And it's like, okay, but GDP growth infinitely?
Again, physically impossible. There really aren't any true exponential functions anywhere in the universe. There are functions that are exponential for the period you're looking at them, but they're going to go like sigmoid.
They're all S-curves.
Yeah, exactly.
Except for Cobb-Douglas. That's a true exponential function.
Oh.
The Cobb-Douglas function.
Is it just a really slow growing one or something? Is it exponentially slow growing? Because that sounds like cheating. But whoa, all right. I just typed Cobb-Doug and I guess that makes sense. Particular functional form.
It's just the exponent is just it's to the 1/4. So.
Oh, just a low. You could do to the.
It's a very low alpha. That's all it is.
Does that count as exponential if it's to the? Wouldn't it be 1 to the 1.12 or 1.25? Wouldn't or anything anything if it's to the 1 power, it's not exponential.
Right?
If it's to the less than
the fraction is a logarithm, right?
Fair enough. In that case, it's not exponential.
Yeah.
This is less than 1.
Particular function form for widely used representation. Anyway, sorry. I'm just but everyone.
I just want to show off that I knew that.
That's totally fine. Name dropping random equations. Have you ever heard of the Weierstrass function or Weierstrass? Mike, do you know that one? That's it's not differentiable at any point. Here, one sec. While we're name dropping interesting functions.
Do you guys ever feel like
almost
this conversation feels this MMT, non-MMT conversation feels religious?
I mean, everything's
economics feels, because it's like you can't run that experiment again. You have to have a whole other civilization. And it has to collapse, and then it's totally the Weierstrass function.
So I mean, if that's the case, what is this?
It's fractal. So if you zoom, it's just basically imagine an infinite series of
it's really pretty
frequencies.
though.
Oh yeah, frequencies of sinusoids that don't overlap. They're like, I think they use, it's like either primes or they don't. But basically the end result is as you zoom in, it wiggles. And as you zoom in more on like a wiggle and you're like, oh, that'll round off. It'll be the top of a wiggle, the bottom of a wiggle. It just wiggles more. And you zoom in more and there's still wiggles. So you're like, how do I get a tangent line anywhere on the, and there isn't one. It's actually the math of it doesn't allow for one. And there's a formula for, see, it's got a cosine right in there.
Were you a math major?
No, physics.
Oh, physics. Okay.
I just.
That's basically a math major.
Don't tell math
Don't tell that
majors
to a math
that.
major.
Yeah. That would
Fair enough.
piss them off so much.
Fair enough.
What we do is blasphemy to them.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
This looks nice. This equation looks nice. And they're like, there's no axioms behind what you're doing. In fact, the whole point is it's inconsistent. What in God's name? That's not a proof. Why are you calling that a proof? Yeah, totally.
Yeah, math gets really weird when you get like very advanced. It really, like, it's so funny. Like everything just turns into philosophy at some point.
Yeah.
Oh, you'll have to.
There's a point where you're like, okay, we're talking about reality. Okay, now we're just into like La La Land, where we like no one really knows anything for sure, and just
Sure. Right. I mean,
What?
you end up with like, so Paimon, I maybe this is what he's talking about. I don't know. But like last time we were talking, I mentioned like the adjacency of photon emission sites. So if you have like a star go supernova a million years ago, and then your eye gets a photon directly from that hasn't interacted with anything on the way, if it's gone through essentially vacuum and it statistically hasn't interacted with anything, it was traveling at C the entire time, C in a vacuum. So it has experienced zero local time. And if you're in the reference frame of the photon, so if you were like arbitrarily like, or if you were traveling along at C with the photon.
Wouldn't you have to be in space though?
What do you mean?
Like for it to hit your eyeball and not interact with anything else?
You're right. So some, as it's traveling through a gas, you would necessarily have interaction. You're absolutely
yeah, because it slows down.
Yeah, and and the incident event also is so it's not quite at C, and so you'd end up with not quite adjacency. You're right, but if you're in, let's say, you can go into the vacuum of space and just have your eyeball hanging out there, but then it goes through all that goop, the goop of the lens before it goes into the actual right. But and then you're also, because you're in a vacuum, you're going to have the liquid on the surface of your eyeball. It's going to vaporize as you're pulled into that vacuum, and so that'll also form a gas layer briefly. So there's no way to. And by the time that gas layer is no longer there, your eyeball is not going to be doing any visual. It's not going to be taking in any photons at that point. You're dead. So.
But what would happen if it didn't? Like it did hit your eyeball and didn't interact with anything else?
Oh, well. From the reference frame of the photon, that no time has passed and there's adjacency between you and that supernova.
Oh, that's interesting.
Area of emitting, yeah. So this happens with all photons.
See, like that's the kind of shit I'm talking about. That you're just like at that point you're just like you're multiple you're the meta. You're almost like discussing what like time, like you have to address what time even is, and
you have to decontextualize the monkey space that we all like grew up in.
Yeah.
Like just to be an organism, you have to know. Yeah, objects have permanence. They stay in one place. They move around. If you move them around or someone else does, things like that. They don't occupy multiple places. They don't cease to be for a little while and then show up again. And all that kind of has to go out the window when you're talking about the information objects of physics in certain domains. So like event horizon of a black hole, inside of a star, you actually end up with, sufficiently large stars don't need this actually, but stars like our sun, if they didn't have photon tunneling, if there wasn't a quantum mechanical event occurring because of just the reduced degrees of freedom inside of the core of the star, you actually wouldn't have fusion happening inside the sun, or it'd be very improbable that fusion would occur at all. And so you right away, just to have the sun work, you already need to appeal to both the very big and the very small, and the very small in this case being quantum mechanical stuff.
I guarantee payment's too high for this conversation.
No, dude, I understand. Suns are Newtonian and quantum.
Yes, yeah. And then
Paul, have you read much like raw metaphysics before?
No, I once read the Wikipedia.
What is metaphysics? I've never really heard of that.
Because the reason why I bring it up is because I feel like someone with there's very few people who I know who can actually get a degree in physics and come out of it like sane and alive.
Well, I am alive. Yeah, I'm alive as far as I can tell.
Fair enough.
That's it.
and but I feel like it's really funny to hear Edwin's like
Edwin's laughter
after the
is
fact
because of the delay. Edwin, did you get the link I sent you on? You can download the Zoom Android app onto the Chromebook.
I'll be right back.
And use that. See you, Mike.
No, because
no, I'll just use my phone actually.
The reason why
I phone now. We'll wait for his response. There's a delay. It's relativistic effects that are causing. Yeah. Oh,
he's out. Okay.
All right.
Oh man.
No, the reason why I was bringing it up is because I always feel like people who do science should read metaphysics, and B, should read philosophy of science, which deals with the epistemology of science. Because I was watching this this conference between, it was like Zizek, and there was like 4 or 5 other academics,
and so on.
The
nose. Yeah.
And the physicist there was a very prominent physicist. I can't recall his name, a German physicist, and he was like, I'm a physicist. Metaphysics is junk, which is basically a metaphysical statement. So, there's I feel like there's a lot of to be gained by doing metaphysics.
Yeah.
Which is it? One of these? Niels Bohr?
My phone is better.
Oh God.
That would be amazing if he had Niels Bohr on, because Niels Bohr has been dead for a while, and also not German at all. I think.
Wait, so are you guys actually getting me? Am I not cutting?
Yeah, we hear you now, Edwin.
You're coming through. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay.
I can hear you.
What were you gonna ask
That's
him?
good. Okay, what do you think about Jordan Peterson?
Oh boy.
I like his self-help stuff. I find his self-help stuff to be actually pretty useful. I remember reading and watching a couple of his lectures on just like purely get your shit together. I was like, this is pretty good. Like, this is good advice. And I like the fact that he's such a curmudgeon, because like I fucking cannot stand those like self-help gurus that like try to be all positive. Like it always makes me feel so like I just want to throw up, like when they're just like, oh, you gotta live your best life, reinvent yourself, blah blah blah. I'm like, fuck that. Like that's such like hypocritical, like false. But JVP basically just goes, life fucking sucks dick. And it's fucking horrible.
You're right. Yeah,
and you just gotta like figure out how to like be disciplined. And I appreciate that. But I think his politics sucks, obviously. I'm a leftist, so.
Well,
it's interesting. Did you watch his debate with Zizek?
Yeah, that was
funny because it's like
that was barely a debate.
Zizek wasn't.
I don't think he did a good job preparing for that.
No, he read the Communist Manifesto. He's like to prepare for this debate. I reread the Communist Manifesto that I haven't read in like 20 years. And I'm like, where's the 18th Brumaire? Where's Critique of Gothic Program? Where's Civil War in France? Like, all the good Marxian literature is completely gone from his preparation.
You expect him to read 5 books before a debate?
I thought books are essays.
Well, not only that, it's a debate that people are. It's a debate that they set up. They hyped for 6 months.
And Zizek knew everything about.
Okay.
Zizek knew everything about JVP.
I think if he had just like watched a few videos of Zizek, he would have.
He would have even understood that he wasn't advocating Stalin,
right? He was just sort of gently lionizing Stalin. He was here. Let me show you one sec. There's a photo of Zizek in bed, and a Stalin. I think it's Stalin is behind him.
No, he has a poster of Stalin in his house.
Room. Yeah, in his home.
But he literally explicitly says that he does it to make fun of the fucking morons. Yeah, like he does it completely ironically.
Well, Peterson also has a bunch of communist imagery in his home.
So
which he also does it ironically.
What? Yeah. Well,
what does Zizek think? Well, what's his? I don't know about whatever they were talking about.
Stalin supporters now.
No, about the debate. What were his thoughts?
He was well, the thing about Zizek is that first and foremost, he's really a Lacanian. Like that's really his main thing. Like he really does put psychoanalysis as like the core of all his ideas. And then, but the Hegel, like he claims that he's primarily a Hegelian, but he's really primarily Lacanian. And then the Hegel is just supplemental. And then
wait,
like,
are you
so
really
weird.
telling him what he is?
Yeah.
He's talked enough that you can figure it out.
Yeah.
He has a lot of
You
lectures.
think you know it better than
books.
him?
I got
He
a
has
Dude,
book.
are you kidding me? Are you
He
kidding
has
me?
so much content. You can definitely
That premise that you know yourself better than other people and can know you is such bullshit. Like, I don't know
that's true.
myself. You know, like how often
Probably.
do you get people saying
Well,
like,
why would you
why are
think
you in a
other
bad
people
mood?
can know you if they don't hear everything you think?
Because
No,
they're
'cause
not
of your
distracted
behavior.
by your thoughts. They can notice your behavior.
But that's
There's no
part of
bias,
who you are.
like,
What
you
you
know.
think is part of who you are, isn't it?
It's also distraction.
Okay, but it's still part of who you are. It's better if it's not there, sure. But what you think is still who you are. Part
Well,
of
if it's better if it's not there, the other people
Yeah.
don't have it. So that's why they can, in some cases,
Yeah.
because they're also distracted, but see who you are
right.
more than you can.
Yeah, but anyway, the point is that
Well-
Zizek at the very end is a Marxist, but that's like the last thing he is.
It's a bunch of stuff in the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess that doesn't sound very good to me.
He's a cokehead or maybe he just has like a
Marxist.
nervous
Well,
tick. I don't know what the
when
thing
you
is.
hear capitalism, you think markets. When you hear socialism
When
or
I hear
communism,
capitalism, I
Yeah.
think markets. No,
Yeah.
because I think markets can be distorted. I think about a specific type of market.
no. So capitalism isn't just about markets. It's a
Yeah.
specific.
Yeah, you
It's a
acquiring
specific
capital.
idea. No, it's not even about, because there's so much like that has to go into even having markets, right? Like your legal structures, your political
In fact-
structures. Excuse me.
I don't think there's that much that needs to go in there to have a basic market structure.
That's kind of the point, because that's
Like,
the thing
pretty
is that
simple,
markets
actually, I think.
pre-exist capitalism.
Predate.
So,
Yeah.
Payman, all I'm saying is, if you call the world today capitalist, right?
Yeah,
There's so much legal infrastructure,
Uh-huh.
right, that like favors like that with certain ideologies favoring certain agendas over time that don't just promote markets for market's sake. They promote different kinds of markets to
Mhm.
different societies. So there's an entire ideology underlying the global system that
Mhm.
can't be like, that is when we say capitalism, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about the ability to exchange goods and services. It's the
So we're
ideology.
talking about like capitalism as it is today.
Not just as is today. There's a whole body of ideas that have evolved for a few hundred years about like what creates a successful society, how markets work. It's complicated.
Yeah,
Go
I mean,
ahead.
like from the Marxist perspective, I mean, because like from the Marxist perspective, what defines capitalism is its mode of production, right? So it's the fact that income is divided between labor and capital, and then from there is where you get the replicative system of capital accumulation, and that's basically capitalism. And then what the Marxists say is that the system has certain characteristics and properties which are internally inconsistent, which will lead to, for instance, economic crisis, and it'll lead to things like class warfare, and it'll lead to things like it just has internal tensions that are unsustainable, and that you have like. That's why Marxists will often talk about like late stage capitalism.
Uh-huh.
Where it's
There's
like
a whole
basically-
subreddit on that.
Yeah,
That
like
subreddit though, like it
a lot of
started
fun.
originally as like ironic jokes that you would see, like a thing that's like a sign that you buy that says "keep off the lawn" or whatever. But then it was a bunch of people on the left took over the subreddit, and now unironically,
that's always fun.
That's
so
cool.
that one kind of evolved over time. Not necessarily.
But like, yeah, like the point is
Interesting.
capitalism and markets are not to be equated, and the libertarian conception of capitalism is really not like, to me, it's not very coherent.
Uh-huh.
They're basically just advocating for like some kind of utopian liberalism where like the logical conclusion of libertarianism is basically like Pinochetism. It's just have a liberal tyrant.
Pinochet is a leader of Chile in the 1970s that the U.S. supported, and he killed a bunch of people, like a lot.
Yeah,
Wow.
but he protected
people
property
kill
rights.
a lot of people.
He protected property rights.
Okay, now I see.
There's
Yeah, he
No,
overthrew
actually,
a Marxist.
the amount of violence that has been required to keep international capitalism in place is actually kind of stunning.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't so that doesn't mean that you need a lot of violence to keep markets in place. But you keep
do you think there would be less economic violence with MMT, with every nation doing MMT?
I mean, that's not even what.
It'll probably be like
because you can't.
Where there's
well,
less
first of all,
violence most of the
you
time. You
can't do MMT
until there's the huge spike of violence at the very end.
Yeah.
Paymon, you can't do MMT, but that's not what I was talking about.
Like,
because I made that mistake last time I was talking to Edwin.
Well, it's a description of how the system works.
Like we've been doing MMT.
Right, it'd be like if you talk about Newtonian physics versus relativity, right? It's like a different way of looking at what is.
Yeah, that's it. That's a good way to. That's a good analogy, I think. Yeah.
Right.
I don't understand.
It's in the sense that MMT is sort of telling you. I thought it was telling you when it was okay to print money all the time, and there's the implicit initial assumption, which is that it is okay at some time, which some people would tell you it's never okay to print money. Money is this sacred thing. And the physics of the universe would tell you it's physically impossible. If your money is just gold, then you can't print more. You'd have to do neutron activation.
That's not true, though.
Cost more. What?
Like you can debase the currency with gold. They'd mix in like copper and stuff like that.
That's
the debasement of money under a gold standard, I think, is much easier. Like it's much easier to get hyperinflation in a gold standard than it is in just a free-floating fiat regime.
Why?
Because for that reason, because if you like think about it this way,
because you can like print copper and stuff and like wrap it.
Well, no, because like
a copper subcoin and a gold outer coin.
No, because the international market won't accept that. Like, it's like the example we gave. It's the example we talked about Weimar.
It's like a really obvious. It's a really obvious constraint.
So how can it be subject to hyperinflation if you
because
can't
you can get
really obvious. Go ahead.
I was going to say because you could get the situation of Weimar where because they're under the gold standard, every additional unit of foreign exchange has to be equal to the gold reserves. And if there's an imbalance there, that causes an immediate devaluation of the currency, which is how the hyperinflation occurred.
The gold didn't devalue, the currency devalued.
Against gold.
Right.
Yeah, but gold itself can't devalue.
I don't know.
So it's interesting. So wait, can I say something? Go. You have to assume the political dimension. Reception. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I think we heard you.
Yeah, you're coming through.
You have to assume the political dimension, right? So, Adrian is saying it's much easier to get hyperinflation if you're in a gold standard. And you're like, yeah, but that's if you print money. When he's saying it's much easier, as in if you live in a society, there might be times where you need to print money. I mean, there will likely, given enough time, there will be. So he's saying it's easier, as in one of those times, you're not, if you're using gold, you're definitely going to get inflation, whereas in other systems you won't. So but you're assuming that, like, why would you ever print money? Well, it doesn't happen in isolation. Like, they literally went to war and had to pay debts that equal 10% of their GDP every month. Because of war reparations.
And they also had
Mike, you might have a little. I mean, Mike's told me about this before, right? There was a bunch of countries that were forcing Germany to pay, because Germany had tried to take over the world twice.
Yeah.
And so, just a little thing.
And they didn't. This was the first. World War I wasn't like that.
Take over the world. Okay.
Yeah.
It was some guy got shot.
Germany was only defending their ally in World War I.
Yeah,
right. Everyone
Lenin
had set
actually
up all
preferred
these
the German side.
these little alliances where they said, if you attack you, then I have to attack that guy, and then that guy attacks that guy, which
Yeah.
But they were
seems
all
very
secret.
convenient. Like, did this all get set up by the lizard people? Just tell me. Just say it one way or the other. Did the lizard people set this up, and then they just like, we just
Pretty
gotta
much.
kill that one dude?
Yes,
All right,
they
whatever.
did.
I'm just wondering. Because David Icke, you know, he's kicked off all the channels now, so we gotta vouch for him here on YouTube.
So, like, what happened was the three enemies in World War I were Germany, Austria, and the Ottoman Empire. And after the war, both Austria and the Ottoman Empire were dissolved as countries.
So was Germany.
Yeah. But at least, like, in the sense of the German Empire, it was still
I mean, you got Poland carved out and Czechoslovakia and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. But it was like the only one around left to pay war reparations. And so they forced all the punishment.
We got
onto
stuck with the
Germany.
bill.
Right. And all the external debts were forced to be settled in gold.
That's the part.
What's ironic is that Germany didn't even start World War I.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess if they knew how to print money better, they might have won the war, right?
Right. Well, the printing money thing, they did it to their own people because they had to pay back gold to what? France, right? Yeah. That's the part that I wanted to.
And here's the thing.
History, go.
And here's the thing. Like, as soon as Weimar Germany is like, look, like we're gonna fucking default because we can't keep doing this. France invades the Rhineland, which is basically this region of Western Germany that's highly productive. It's where Frankfurt and Cologne and Aachen and all these other cities are.
Yeah.
And they basically just took over that region, which completely destroyed all their capacity to export. And their only way of getting gold reserves is by exporting. And this is something that John Maynard Keynes, if you actually read the consequences of the war. I forgot the exact name of the essay. But basically he wrote a book in like 1922 where he basically predicted that the rise of Hitler and like the World War II was going to happen, because he's like, look, the current way that this trade system is set up means that in order for Germany to be able to pay the reparations, France and the UK have to purchase German goods. And if they don't do that, then they're just going to get
Keynes?
What?
Sorry, he had a journal apparently. Were you on the chat when we were talking about this earlier? Keynes got up to some awful shit. You know, he's a great economist. I'm sure he had lots of interesting theories.
I've seen different things on the internet about
unimaginably shameful activity known to man.
Carry on. Are we kink shaming?
No,
is that what we're doing now?
No, Paul.
No. Like he liked boys, but But anyway, you go to.
I haven't heard of that.
I've literally seen different things about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I met Skidelsky, who's the Keynes biographer. He actually got knighted because he wrote like a 5-volume biography.
They've knighted worse. His biographer got knighted. Okay.
Yeah, well, I think Keynes got knighted too. I'm not
Keynes
sure.
was a lord.
I would not surprise me at all.
Yeah,
he was already a lord. Yeah,
I know that Keynes was like famously like bisexual too. And like I definitely know
none of that bugs me.
But
it was just I think he had in his journal. Let's talk about Keynes theory. It's fine. It's not.
Anyway, the point is that what Keynes was pointing out was that because of limitations of the gold standard, in order for Weimar to actually be able to meet its reparation requirements, they would have to export to get those gold reserves, and they can't do that unless the UK and France buys German goods, which they can't if France invades the industrial heartland of Germany, which produces all the goods that gets exported. So it's just like a double whammy that caused the hyperinflation. That's basically the situation.
That's his argument.
Which is widely accepted.
And
that sounds pretty legitimate to me.
Predictions based on it.
That's why he argued that's why during the Great Depression he argued that the UK should get off the gold standard.
Wait, so did Germany eventually get off the standard or get out of debt?
Yeah, they basically just defaulted.
They printed it.
No, they defaulted. They just went, we're not going to pay.
I think during World War II, they confiscated a lot of gold from places that they conquered too. I think if you they're like the third or fourth largest gold holding in the world, and nobody addresses where that came from.
True.
Oh,
And
Germany?
and they put it in fucking Swiss banks, which
Did
they
they
still
take
have.
it from
There's,
someone they didn't like?
There's an area of Czechoslovakia that's called the Sudetenland, and it's like
Mhm.
it has a whole bunch of ethnically German people in it. And so Hitler invaded Czechoslovakia saying, oh, we're going to reconquer the German land, but annexed the whole country. And
Yeah.
Czechoslovakia had a whole bunch of gold in the Bank of England. And Hitler was telling Chamberlain, like, oh, that's our gold now. And it was kind of controversial because it's like Germany owes the gold debt to Britain for the World War I reparations, and then Britain gets to decide whose gold pile that is in the vault. And I think it went to Hitler.
You know what's so funny? That reminded me, totally unrelated, but it reminded me of the fact that like fucking the UK just seized Maduro's gold. Like that was like a couple years ago, where like Venezuela had like something like $6 billion worth of gold in the Bank of England, and the UK just went, oh, okay, $1.2 billion worth of gold, and they're just like, you're not gonna have this anymore.
The Bank of England helped Nazis sell gold from.
Was England owed gold by by Venezuela?
No,
oh, sorry,
it was just part of the sanctions.
They're storing it in the vault.
So yeah, why did they?
Like, Bank of England just has like big sleds full of gold, apparently.
Oh, sanctions, I see.
Maduro's a fucking idiot. Maduro's a fucking idiot, and it's kind of embarrassing how the U.S. can't even like do regime change there.
Did you see the thing? Those two American guys got captured.
Bro, like I'm like, how can
what was that?
We tout ourselves as a superpower?
It's like so incompetent. Like this dude started a private security firm in Florida after there was like a bunch of school shootings, and they originally started out.
Look up. Wait. Sorry. Look up. It's called Silver Corp Inc. Yeah.
So
Silver Corp.
Yeah. So their whole thing is they're going to hire private security for schools and like train teachers. And then during the 2016 campaign, he got hired by Trump to do security in different campaign events. And who knows what happened from there, but next thing the guy's like in Venezuela, and he signed this contract with Guaido to overthrow the Venezuelan government.
Pete Buttigieg.
Whoa.
Yeah, and it's the contract says like $200 million, and Guaido couldn't even come up with the $1 million retainer to keep Silvercorp. And so the guy decides, okay, I'm just going to do it for free. And like,
wait, why?
Because if he succeeds, you have PDVSA, which is, I mean, it might be like the top 10 largest corporations on earth. Mm-hmm. It's the Venezuelan oil company. Like,
okay, they're supporting him now or something? If he, I'm confused. He was supporting a coup or a military, an armed incursion into Venezuela
to oust Maduro.
So
this was like 2 days ago.
Yeah.
Their Twitter account keeps sending out like cryptic tweets about secret operations and stuff. And like the day that they're going to do their coup, some news report comes out in the paper about like everything that they're about to do.
Why would you tweet about your coup?
He decided to go do it anyway.
Oh,
what?
This is
Oh my God!
They have the two guys captured that are the American dudes. They got all their passports. There's like tweets with them in photos with the rebels, and they're like, "We're welcoming our North American brothers," and it's like, oh man,
what's happening?
Like the least competent thing ever. It's awful.
And it's incredible to me because it's not like the Venezuelan regime is exactly a bastion of competence. You know what I mean? Like these people are pretty bad at what they're doing.
Yeah. I mean, Maduro used to be like a bus driver.
Oh, you mean the existing government is bad at what they're doing?
Yeah. Well,
It
yeah.
sounds
the
like
Maduro
the
regime.
coup people were also bad at what they
That's
were
my
doing.
point.
Yeah.
I'm saying like
Really?
how embarrassing is it that like fucking like this is like the best that Pompeo can do? Like
This
really?
is like a Mr. Bean movie where everybody's just like he keeps whimsically falling into the next step in the
Yes.
plot, but he is incompetent and his arch nemesis or whatever. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, literally.
right.
That's literally like it's
Life is surprisingly Mr. Bean like, I found.
yeah. Yeah. I was actually in Caracas in like 2018. And like literally nothing's changed since my childhood. Like I would go there my whole like childhood, like the first like when I was like 5, 6, 7, 8, and like it was just always like a shitty slum-filled typical Latin American hellhole where like just crime-ridden and poverty-ridden, where like they have like the upper middle class, which is just like eating at like the fanciest restaurants, but the rest of the country is just like, wow, this is garbage. And honestly, nothing has changed. It is exactly the same. Like all the people who are like, oh, socialism, this, I'm just like, bro, it's exactly the same. Like
It's
nothing's
bullshit.
changed.
I bet it's probably a bit worse. I mean,
Yeah, well,
hasn't currency
it's now,
devalued like even more?
it's
I heard
worse.
somewhere that the average weight is down by 10 kilograms.
Uh,
I don't know if that's
there's-
true. It's just something.
Yeah,
I don't
there's
know
a lot
how
of,
you. Yeah.
There's a lot
I
of
don't know
like
how you-
stuff like that I'm just like, well, maybe.
Like, think about what you would need to do to actually figure that out. You would need to weigh a lot of people.
Well, you
Not
can
that
weigh a
much.
sample.
Yeah, but like, I mean, you would have to go all around Venezuela and see how.
Yeah,
I
that's
don't know.
true. Yeah, I don't
Stuff
think it would
like
be
that's
easy.
not too
In
hard
that
to do,
I'm
'cause
not saying it's not
population-
possible, but I'm saying when
11
Maduro's
kilograms.
president, it might be hard to do.
That's
like
right.
Populations
they definitely had an uptick in malnutrition as a result of the economic crisis. That's for sure. But I don't know about an average of 11 kilos. That sounds a lot. Like that. There wasn't like actual starvation. You know what I mean? Like I was there. Like I would have.
You guys keep going.
I would have noticed that. You know.
I mean,
I was going to say, since populations are normally distributed, it's possible to do the statistics to measure it, but it obviously requires like good studies and ethical researchers and not.
well, and that's
being
my
hyped up by
point.
the
In the
media and
current
stuff like that.
Venezuelan environment, I don't know how you would
Yeah.
do that.
Exactly. Who would fund that research?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is also there's like how Mike is pointing out, like there's also like a lot of vested interest to like make the Venezuelan system look as horrible as humanly possible.
Right.
So there's like it's like I remember I was watching this thing about North Korea. Like, do you guys remember that whole thing about the haircuts? How like they only let you have 7 haircuts? Remember how that was a thing? So like in North Korea, there was a story that came out that like you could only have 7 haircuts, and it turned out to be not true. Like it was debunked. Like these 2 Australian guys went to Pyongyang, and like he literally just styled his hair however he wanted to, and there wasn't any restriction. So like there's a lot of things like that that like. I mean, if you go to South Korea, it looks like everybody has like 2 or 3 haircuts, to be honest. You know?
Yeah.
But yeah. So the thing about Venezuela is that it's very similar to the Weimar situation, where you have a supply shock combined with a fixed exchange regime, and that's where the hyperinflation happens. And then because their supply chains are again totally dependent on their oil sales, because that's how they get foreign exchange reserves. If oil price goes down, they lose their ability to cover import costs.
Do all you guys understand all the terminology that he's using?
No.
Because Okay. So AJ, can you break it down?
Okay, so you have when I think Mike illustrated this last time pretty good, but basically like, you know, if Paymon is Iran and I'm Peru, if I sell Paymon,
I don't want to buy it, dude.
if I sell
I don't
Paymon,
fucking trust your fucking MMT government.
if I sell Paymon fucking
Reasonable.
like 10 llamas, right?
I'll
Those
give you 5 sheep.
right. Okay, he gives you 5 sheep. The exchange rate by which we're doing the sale is actually the way the sale is conducted, right? So like barter doesn't exist anymore. So the way it works is Paymon has to acquire. Well, just for argument's sake, just hear me out. So like for Paymon, it'd be like he needs to acquire Peruvian currency to be able to purchase Peruvian goods, and I would need to acquire Iranian currency to be able to purchase Iranian goods. So in effect, what it means is that in order for me to cover my Iranian imports, there has to be some kind of inflow of Iranian currency. Make sense?
Or you have to be able to go out and buy it.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like in order to do that, you have to.
It doesn't actually have to be in your bank.
Well, no, because the what's it called? The conversion is instantaneous in the banking sector, but it's effectively that's what's happening, and that's where the foreign exchange reserves comes from, right? So like the way, the reason why every central bank in the world has a certain amount of dollars in their reserves is because they use those dollars to be able to fund the banking system's ability to get dollar-denominated goods and services. Otherwise,
that's one of the misconceptions. Like people are like, oh, all the U.S. government debt is owned by China, but what they're doing is they have to keep the U.S. dollars to do trade with us, and you don't get any interest doing that. So they keep them as treasury bonds, and then as they have to do trade, they're selling the bonds to get dollars, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so they don't actually have to have the dollars in their account. They can go buy it with these treasuries or like other mechanisms.
Well, no, they need the dollars. They need the dollars to buy the treasuries.
What? No, other way around. Right? Aren't they taking? Don't they have our debt?
The only reason that they're putting them in treasuries is to get interest on the pile of dollars.
It's like every other bank.
Oh yeah.
I'll put it this way: when China sells us an iPhone, they get the $500, whatever the cut is of Foxconn. They get those dollars. Those dollars immediately gets entered into the Chinese banking system. The Chinese banking system then, what they basically do is that they'll have a certain amount of dollars that gets reserved from all these iPhone sales, and then they take those dollars and they invest them in treasury bonds because they're, like Mike said, they want to earn interest on it.
Okay. So why do they need those? Why do they need to keep all those?
Because we only allow them to do something in U.S.
Well, because then they have to come back and buy our semiconductors.
Yeah. Okay, so let's say China has $10. Okay, and I go to China. I'm like, here, you need to buy this iPhone for $100. Can China go to Switzerland and say, hey, give me $90 for yuan, and then they can make the purchase?
Yeah, they can sell sell domestic currency in the foreign exchange market in exchange for dollars.
So they don't need to have dollars because they can just go get it anytime they need it. It's just a matter of like hedging against insurance at any point in time.
You can get a better price if you keep the dollars, right? Because as soon as you need it, like that's when
it's way more efficient. Yeah,
and not only that, but also like if you're China, you also have a managed peg, and you want to have a consistent price stability with the exchange rate. So you don't want to be going around selling yuan in the open market like that, because that could cause devaluation that you might not want.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Managed peg sounds like an interesting name for a band. Or
it sounds like something Keynes would be doing.
Oh god. Oh boy.
So now that you understand that, he's saying
I don't understand it. There's always something missing. I always get blue balls when I talk about MMT.
We're not talking about MMT, we're just talking about the
sexual
idea of foreign currency reserves.
It's a very tantric conversation.
Ooh. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's just like another interesting point. It doesn't feel like I have any closure. It doesn't feel like I understand foreign currency.
Well, he was just saying that, every country basically has foreign currency reserves so they can buy goods from other countries, right? They don't buy them in their own currency. They buy them in dollars.
Yeah, but I'm saying great, but you don't need foreign currencies. I think
everybody has them.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean you need them.
You do.
Why?
I could see.
You can always go out and buy them.
But that's the same thing as saying you need them.
You could say you could always go out and buy them, but necessarily in order to exchange between two currencies, you need to have one side that's willing to evaluate what the currencies are worth with respect to one another, right? Like you need at least the guy who's behind the desk at the currency at the.
The question of whether you need it is not relevant in many ways, because the point is that like people operate with foreign currency reserves, and
yeah, like this is how trade happens.
And because that happens,
okay,
you know, the more money you print, the more you're devaluing your dollar against the reserves that you have.
Hey,
your
Edwin,
currency against the reserve.
I
that
agree.
You have. Yeah, no, but that's because it's pegged. I mean, like that's the entire.
Even
like
if
the entire.
Don't
pegged.
judge. All right, that's.
No, but like one of the
Even
entire.
if it's not pegged.
One of the most important insights of MMT is how you can get to the point where your currency isn't like you don't require you know, foreign currency reserves to, you know,
because you've printed
What
you
much.
achieved a certain. It's
You can
because
build
you
a
achieved
wall out
a
of
certain level of
bills
development
around your country.
if you achieved a certain level of development, you don't need foreign currency reserves to determine like the value of your currency relative to other currencies.
Yeah,
That's
so,
one of the insights.
Like this is actually a common criticism of MMT is that it only applies to the United States because the United States is the world currency, has the world reserve currency.
So we have all the guns and the super carriers and the nukes, and that's why
and the world reserve currency.
Everyone just goes, yeah, man, whatever, all right.
And the only reason why MMT,
whatever.
And this is what the Marxists say is that the only reason why MMT not only just applies to the U.S. but also to the UK, the EU, and Japan is because the UK, EU, and Japan are basically part of the same hegemonic bloc as the U.S.
Yeah, but that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make too much sense.
So if somebody else becomes strong, then the U.S. can't do MMT anymore? If someone else becomes too strong.
It means that the other country can do MMT as well.
Yeah, more for everyone.
I mean, I feel comfortable saying do MMT, but for the purposes of the conversation.
What is do? Can we stop saying do MMT?
Yeah.
How to do MMT. It's gonna turn out.
Someone should make a how it works
thing. Manual muscle testing procedures.
The point Adrian was making, though, Paymon, is that Venezuela's hyperinflation happened for a similar reason to Germany's hyperinflation.
This is how you do MMT. Manual muscle testing.
Okay, manual muscle.
Guy.
Right.
That's pretty.
The anterior deltoid.
Not productive for the joke.
How many views does this video have?
113,000.
113,000.
I don't want to speculate. Anterior deltoid coracobrachialis.
Okay.
Fucking nerds.
Coraco.
All right. Anyway.
My shoulder hurts.
Do you want to watch more?
You need some MMT, bro. You see, MMT's the solution to all of it, all of our problems.
Yeah.
No, but would it be better if we say practiced MMT? I'm gonna get some food.
Praxis.
I mean, like to practice MMT would be to make decisions about your economy where your concerns about inflation aren't based on exponential debt, but they're based on capacity. Nobody's doing that.
Yeah, that's actually a good.
You can't ignore exponential debt.
I mean, like MMT doesn't even under the MMT framework, debt isn't actually debt.
What you think of the national debt is not analogous to like a household or government or corporate debt. This is the argument that me and Mike were having last time about
what
corporate bonds.
Debt?
Are you talking about government debt?
Well, are you claiming that government debt is different from other sorts of debt?
Yeah, yes. It's fundamental. What it is it's an accounting. The national debt is just accounting for all outstanding treasuries. That's really what it is.
Yeah.
Can't I issue identical debt to you?
What?
Wait,
Can't I issue identical debt to you? Can I say, here's a Paymon treasury. I'll give you 10% interest and it matures in 10 weeks.
But
you can, but I wouldn't buy it.
You'll be dead.
Why would I buy your treasury?
Within 120 years, but we don't know a government will be dead within 120 years.
But those, I hate how speculative, Paul, you get with these kind of things. Okay, yes, if you're the sun's gonna blow up in 1.2 million years or so, sure, then this conversation's irrelevant.
It's way later than that. Don't worry.
All right,
we'll be here in a million. It might have changed a bit.
It's 4 billion,
look
right?
it up. Yeah, it's going to be in the billions. Carl Sagan numbers.
Really?
Okay, so
yeah.
That.
The time evolution of a star.
Governments are the only entities that can give out
Nova
treasuries.
either. This scale.
Yes.
It would just
that means I can't give out a treasury. I can't say, hey, here's a Paymon treasury with these terms.
Well, you would just
do you
call
have
it a Paymon bond.
literally like there's a treasury like
yeah.
Countries have
treasury's just a term
treasuries
for like bond, debt, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, but it's called a treasury.
Conceptual.
No, it's called a treasury note because it's literally from the treasury.
Well, you have notes, bills, and bonds. You have treasury notes, treasury bills, and treasury bonds.
Right.
And they basically denote the
term.
time. Yeah, the term, exactly.
Okay, but the conceptual treasury. Mike, can I issue a treasury?
You can issue a bond.
Somebody would buy it?
You can issue a bond, but you can't issue a treasury.
Yeah, you can issue a note or a bill.
Okay, so is a treasury a governmental bond?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Government bond and treasury are basically synonymous.
So what is the difference?
Treasury note is
I can give
security that offers a
just that it's a bond issued by the United States Treasury.
1 to 10 years. The government sells.
And the United States Treasury is the monopoly supplier.
$1,000 par value.
Yes. I'm the monopoly supplier of Paymon treasuries.
Exactly. Yes.
Exactly.
So I can just MMT it.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's just not going to be worth.
Dude, I will give you 1,000%.
Paymon. I'll put it.
Premiums for $10.
Paymon. I'll
get
put
1,000% back.
Paymon, I'm gonna put this.
How can you pass up on that offer?
I'm gonna put this in your in like using your similar analogy. So like, how would you feel if New York, the city government of New York, owed you $1 million?
I trust Cuomo. Oh, the city. Oh no.
Versus them owing you $1 million worth of subway credit, MTA credit. Which one do you think?
Want the dollars.
No. Which one do you think they can actually deliver?
Okay, because
let's make it 20. Okay. Let's make it 20 billion.
Yeah, the tokens.
Let's make it 20 billion.
That's the point. Is that the MTA credit is issued by the city government of New York, and that is infinite. That they could literally be like, Paymon, we will give you free MTA rides for the rest of your life, and for your kids' life, and for your grandkids until infinity. They could do that.
But if they gave that to everybody, then
that's
each
the constraint.
Token would become
exactly.
That's the constraint.
That's the constraint. The constraint is that the MTA can only hold so many people. The MTA has limitations on time. It might reduce the quality. There's a bunch of other stuff that are contingent or not contingent, adjacent. But the question of whether or not they can do it is not a question, right?
Yeah, I agree.
That's MMT in a nutshell.
Yeah.
That you can just print money.
Yes.
But that you can just print money. Yeah. But that doesn't mean inflation's not going to happen.
Okay,
but inflation
MMT is
happens.
Not saying actually print money. It's just saying you can print money. Because that's what I understood Adrian to say.
It's also saying that we've been doing it too. That's another thing.
But not just that, Paymon, is that like printing money in and of itself, like because when you print money and you're like issuing treasuries, right? There's the whole exponential debt concern. It's saying that exponential debt concern is not going to be what causes inflation. It's going to be that the subway can't provide $20 billion.
Exactly. Thank you. Exactly. Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, there was this American Airlines pass. There was $250,000 back in like the 70s or so, 80s, and they would sell it. It was an unlimited pass, and they said it was like a bond. Instead of paying me dividends in cash, they were paying dividends in air travel.
There you go.
Miles, and it ended up becoming a big legal problem because they. Obviously, this guy just would fly every day for the rest of his life. He just loved being on it. They found like the one autistic guy who was just like, I like planes. And so,
yeah, I mean, you can make arguments about market distortion. You can make arguments about that this will be this causes price discoordination. Like you can make all those kind of arguments, and that's fine. We could have that debate. But I personally, and this is actually the more of the Keynesian side of MMT, is that I think that a lot of the Austrian arguments relating to price are actually not correct per se.
I don't know enough about these things. I'm sorry. Austrian, here, I'm going to read the Wikipedia page on the Austrian.
I think that the argument we were talking about before of like the politicians' ability to judge when it would be reasonable to do so is not going to be good, right? Like they're going to use it trivially and not in any sort of high-minded philosophical or even just like a look at the actual capacity of like what would reasonably cause inflation and what's not. They're going to be like, I need to get reelected next year, and I'm just going to tell my constituents whatever they want.
Right. Well, and that's why we're kind of in a problem. Like this was something that Ray Dalio talked about in 2019. He was like, interest rates are so low that during the next downturn, monetary policy, which is central bank interest rate setting, is not going to be able to get us out of it. We're going to have to, what we're going to see is going to be the largest coordination between monetary policy and fiscal policy, government spending on things like jobs programs, etc.
No, and I'll take
those Kanye shades.
And no, let me finish. And the thing is, like when he said that, he didn't assume that in and of itself would cause inflation. The underlying assumption is that, and the reason there's something like a Federal Reserve, first of all, to carry out monetary policy, is that when it comes to currency, like, democratic governments is just really bad at handling that stuff. Like really. So the question.
Well, I was going to say it's already happening.
So the question.
Sorry.
I mean, not just democratic governments, because it depends. Like some dictators use. Most dictators don't have MMT frameworks, but my point is that we all have legitimate reasons to think like our politicians aren't going to, like, because they're already doing it, right? Like instead of building dams and highways and shit like that, we're gonna just give a bunch of money to the military-industrial complex.
Well, exactly. Like I was gonna say is that like I would argue the opposite. I would say that probably like the current central banking system probably needs more democracy, because the current undemocratic structure of the Federal Reserve, like I don't fucking trust Jeremy Powell to like make decisions on monetary policy. Are you kidding me?
That's right.
You know what I mean? Like,
do you trust Congress?
No, I would trust the people. I would trust the direct electorate more than I would trust.
Would you trust me?
Congress is at least elected.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
It's Jerome
but I mean, I don't know. This is where we could get to like more political philosophy stuff that could get very interesting.
Would you trust
the
population if they voted against you?
What's up?
Would you trust the population if they voted against you?
I mean, I would think that
democracy.
It is democracy, but at the same time, what I would say is like, what's the alternative? Because the alternative is not working.
It is.
Like you could argue for China, right? So I think the People's Bank of China does a pretty damn good job of balancing its entire system and, ensuring supply chains function during a pandemic. And, I think they've done an excellent job. I also think the Republic of China, Taiwan's central bank probably does a pretty good job too. But the EU central bank is garbage, and the Federal Reserve is garbage. So it really does depend.
He's a Catholic.
But the thing is also like, in political conversations, I feel like what would need to happen in order for any because like going forward, the U.S. is going to operate as if modern monetary theory is true. It just has to.
Yeah. Has to necessarily, but they will.
I mean,
you mean it's inevitable from where we are now?
The opposite would be so politically unpalatable
that like what they did to Greece.
No, it would be like the Great Depression right now. If we just started a bunch of austerity, like what
probably headed there anyway.
It'd have to be. You'd have to cut a whole bunch of expenses, raise taxes a ton. Right?
You would shrink the economy.
I don't think you gotta actually do that.
I don't think you have to, but I'm saying like, following, let's say, the Austrian framework, let's say we're trying to get out of the MMT framework and we want to get into a more Austrian system. We would what we would do would shrink the economy by a bunch.
Yeah.
And it would that's just what we would have to do, right? So my point is that's just not politically feasible because too many people's lives.
And that's why we got off the gold standard.
Right. So the question is like, if we're going to operate in this framework, then we have to before we can even start talking about like whether we can do it or not, we just have to start talking about it in those terms, which is now what like the Republicans just printed $5 trillion and now they're like, okay, well we have to start tightening our belts, right? So we're not even having a coherent, like a consistent conversation about how the system works. We're like, we're switching from Keynesian to Austrian depending on what our political aims are, and like with that
I don't
kind
like Keynes or Austrians. They both sound. And
my point is,
Hitler was Austrian, right?
Yes.
I don't know. But my point is, if we don't even have a framework, if we're alternating between MMT and Ross Perot, from month to month, then there's no chance the government can do anything that makes sense. Right?
Yeah.
You're just saying it's inevitable, and so we should come up with a framework for why it's good?
Yeah, because we're not on a path where we can step back from that without.
Dude, how can you say that?
I can see like psychologically on an individual level.
I'm saying we could.
Horribly abusive childhood and
but
being like,
the impacts
in order to, but it doesn't mean it actually was good. It just was. You know what I mean?
I'm saying you could say even if MMT is valid as a framework for how the modern monetary system works, it leads to something akin to a command economy. And because I believe in liberty, I think a society organized around that framework will just have disastrous results. Some people argue that, right? My only point is that if that is true and you want to return, what you're going to have to do is, I mean, first of all, it's going to make most working people worse off. Just like true.
The austerity stuff?
Yeah, I mean, like it just has. So I'm saying, like, even if you can do that for, let's say, a 4-year term, if you're like Herbert Hoover, you come in, you make all these cuts, unless there are external restraints imposed on you, like they did with Greece, the next politician is going to come in and turn on the money printers.
Which is exactly what happened with FDR.
Right.
So you're saying because of the nature of democracy, it's inevitable.
Right.
Yeah, right. I agree that it's a huge problem like that.
Like,
it's none of the, like, you can't campaign as a politician and say, I'm going to raise taxes and reduce all the spending and good stuff that you guys get. Like, no one's going to vote for you.
So like,
there'll be some people, but it's
GDP.
not a lot.
You can be a Republican and argue to cut spending, but you have to at the same time argue to cut taxes. Like you can't say raise taxes and cut spending.
Right, but what the country needs is like a person to actually fix it and raise taxes and cut expenses. It's the question is like, whose expenses are you cutting? And that's what becomes
no. When you say when the country needs that, you're implicitly,
like, if we're going to stop this inevitable decline into a point where we're just printing
road
money.
warrior wasteland.
Wait, no, but Mike, you're making so many assumptions. So you're saying that this is bad, like this system is bad.
It's bad.
Not because you're saying it's a decline into printing money. Okay, well, we've been printing money. My question is like, what makes this system bad? Is it like economic decline, or is it something like about the moral underpinnings of a system like that?
Well, actually, I think it's a rephrasing the question. I would ask Mike, like, would you say that it's not the fact that we're printing and spending money, or is it how we're printing and spending money, right? Because like those are two different things.
It's in my mind, the only point that we should print money is an existential threat when the country wouldn't exist after the fact. Like, there's a point where Rome or the Byzantine Empire got invaded by a big Turkish horde, right? And they're like, we need to debase the currency by 10% so we can hire mercenaries right now to go fight them, because if we don't, the country won't exist. Right? It doesn't matter at that point what the future outlook of your currency's value is going to be if the whole nation doesn't exist, right?
That's interesting.
Like, so they did end up printing the money, debasing it, and it ruined their economy, and they weren't able to fight back over the long term, right? But the slow switch into doing it, I worry, like earlier in their history, for the crisis of the 3rd century was basically caused by debasing the currency. And so they started out in a golden age for Rome in this process, and it became politically convenient to debase the currency, and it was death by 1,000 cuts. And 100 years later, the silver content in the currency was almost nothing, and at the start of the century, it was 100% silver. And so they weren't able to pay for the army anymore, and the whole country collapsed into 50 years of civil war. So I'm worried that we're following a similar path in our own republic, and it's becoming politically convenient to debase the currency rather than raise taxes or cut the spending to achieve the political goals.
Then let me ask you this then, or let you finish.
There's Roman debasement, and then there's Roman debauchery.
Yeah, it's a like hugely almost intractable problem where it's like, we have to accept that our politicians are going to campaign on unpopular things, and it's it's difficult to convince a whole crowd of hundreds of millions of people to think about stuff like that, right? Like no one.
But it would lead to a depression.
Yeah, like I think Mike, I think the problem is that what you're really saying is you don't like the current economic system as a whole, because what I would argue is that the economic system that we've adopted requires this.
I don't know if it's necessarily the whole economic system, just the political climate right now where they're spending much more than they're raising in taxes.
Right. But what I'm saying is that in order to continue in order for the system to continue perpetuity,
it doesn't matter if you've gone into a huge amount of debt.
Well,
that's literally a Keynes quote, by the way.
Wait, literally?
Literally, look up.
No
in the
wonder
long
this
run,
guy
we're all
was
dead.
a monster.
So
you literally don't know that he was. You read something from conservapedia.com.
No, it was not from Conservapedia.
No,
it actually linked, that link you sent me linked to Conservapedia.
Wait, can we not
do we really want to new biography
reveals
shocking? Well, no, now that Edwin said that it didn't, somehow was just Conservapedia. Look,
I don't care about who Keynes fucked. I really don't.
Can we just go back to?
Yeah, Mike. What I'm saying is this:
Rome also had this problem, by the way. But anyway,
the fact. I mean, I agree with you in principle that the political climate, as you worded, will make this inevitable. But I actually think it's deeper than that. I think it's actually the economic system as a whole requires this. And this is kind of what I was saying the first time we talked, which is that the underlying system of fractional reserve banking, by which our entire market economy rests on, requires essentially creating money out of thin air. And the only way to have continuous growth and production is a continuous growth in the money supply. And that means issuing credit. And the issuance of credit can be both private and public, and be used in different things. But I feel like if you're opposed to the very notion that credit can be issued at will, whether by private or public institutions, like you're basically arguing against the entire system.
I'm not opposed to that. It's like right now, the Congress, I don't know how many years, it's like 4 or 5 years in a row now where they haven't balanced the budget reasonably. Like
no, it's been a century.
Oh no.
What? The only time it's happened was under Bill Clinton.
Once.
It's been a century since we haven't had fiscal surpluses.
Sure, but
Hey, Clinton also had that. All right, whatever.
Yeah, but
that's how I pulled it off.
And people would argue
we
that
started to talk about this.
That balanced budget stuff actually led to some of the.
I want to hear Mike. I want to hear Mike's reply.
But anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, we talked about this some in the first episode, but like when you don't have a balance like that, you have to go raise the money in the bond market, right? And so there's
sometimes.
Well, excluding
depends on who you are.
Money.
I mean, yeah, sure. The Treasury will issue auctions, and maybe you'll have a couple of mutual funds and shit that will buy treasuries, and yeah, sure.
Buyers.
No. Can I say something? So this is wait. Can I say something? This is a confusion. So the Federal Reserve doesn't actually wait for the Treasury to sell the treasuries and get money before they credit the account. They just credit the account.
Yeah.
But because we wanted to work within the operational framework so people feel comfortable where debt is issued and the government is borrowing money and they're not just printing money out of nowhere, after the Federal Reserve credits the account, the Treasury issues a note.
Yeah, that's fine. My comment was about the bond auction where they're actually selling the new debt to buyers.
Yeah, but I'm saying it's separated. Like the bond auction happens.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. But they still have to sell the bonds to buyers out in the open market.
Yeah, but the buyers aren't limited, right? So the Federal Reserve pledged that they were going to do $700 billion worth of direct purchases in government bonds to fight the pandemic crisis.
Yeah, but there's still stuff like they are looking at the bid to cover ratio to see how many buyers and stuff there are out there, and they're tracking how that demand for treasury bonds is changing.
Yeah, I mean it's an inflation control to sell it. Like you'd rather the money stay balanced, right? So you'd rather you're basically moving funds from unproductive sources to productive sources, right? So at the Federal Reserve, so if you have $1 million, Mike, that's just lying around, not being productive, and I'm the government, I'd be like, hey, I got a productive use for it. I'll sell you the bond, give me the $1 million, I'll put it to productive use. Yes, that's better because it's the inflation is net zero in that circumstance, right? But I don't see what the point of that is. What we're trying to say with that?
For all the auctions, there's a limited amount of buyers, whether it's the 5-year, 10-year, 1 year, right? And your debt that you issue is getting sold to them. Congress isn't thinking about that, how much demand there is for the bonds when they say, okay, we have a budget shortfall of $1 trillion this year. Let's go. They don't think about it after it goes to the Treasury. And so they're one of the problems is
why should they think about it?
Because it has consequences for everybody.
Like what? What are the consequences?
There could be inflation.
Okay, and when's the last time we had a major inflationary crisis in this country?
It doesn't matter if it's a crisis or not. It's you're working all your life and you have your money in the bank and it's getting inflated away by these people in the government.
But this is what I would say. I feel like that's actually a political decision, right? Because the argument that you're essentially making it's very similar to the argument that the Austrians made about they said the stock market was actually a bubble because when the Federal Reserve put in a bunch of QE money, all that money left the banks because interest rates fell so low and they all went to equity, right? And that's what propped up equity prices. But to me, the real, that's not a concern for me that much because inflation is not a one-way street, right? So inflation doesn't just mean, if all you told me was that in the last century, the dollar devaluated 99%, I'd be like, whoa, that's really bad. Wow, damn, shit, that sucks. But if you also told me that our livelihoods and our standard of living and our productive capacity and our output increased, 7-fold, 8-fold, 10-fold, whatever it was, I would say okay, well, it seems like this is something that is endogenous into the system. And that's why I'm saying, like, I feel like your concerns about inflation are actually, like, if you really analyze them even deeper, I feel like your concern is actually more about the system itself. It's the market, is the whatever you want to call it, the state capitalist market economy that we have. Because that's, to me, it's endogenous to the system. If you don't do inflation, you don't get the growth.
And so if you don't get the growth, there's another concern. So you just say somebody works their entire life, they have their money in their bank accounts, and it gets inflated away. Okay, so that's one negative outcome. Another negative outcome, somebody's worked their entire life, they saved some money, and they started a new business. And all of a sudden, there's going to be deflation, and it's going to be prolonged. And it could have been avoided if we just, especially because it's deflation, which happened under gold standard systems, but deflation under the current state capitalist paradigm is like, we know, like, when deflation, we know how to deal with deflation. So when you're saying the risks of inflation are something that we have to be really careful about with printing money, we understand how to make sure that deflation doesn't happen. And if we don't put enough money to make sure that deflation doesn't happen, that's also something that you're doing that's causing a tremendous amount of harm to all working people.
What if you do it perfectly so there's no inflation or deflation? You just magically match.
That's impossible.
The economy.
That's I mean.
And really, I would also argue that it's impossible to know the limit case, a totally different boundary on that space of like when you've created too much money and now it's all going to fall apart. Which are you arguing that it would never happen, or that's just far off?
It's not a concern I have.
There's two issues, and the first one is knowing, like you said, okay, if we didn't do that, then there'd be deflation. Like, it's difficult to know what the alternate history would be that never happened. And also,
what do you mean?
We've had a lot of
experiment.
No, it's happened. Like the Great Depression was a deflation event.
Yeah. And it's just one giant deflationary spiral.
Like, we had a collapse in, what was it, demand?
A collapse in demand and a collapse of liquidity.
Collapse in liquidity. And we didn't inject liquidity into the system. We had like prolonged inflation.
We had a massive
lizard
bank run.
People lost faith.
Like, I mean, that's what's happened in Greece. That's like, it's happened in a lot of places. We know how it works.
Like the question for me, Mike, is because like it maybe you don't agree with that, right? So I actually would ask you, do you agree that the alternative to inflation is deflation?
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
so then the question for me is, if you want continuous economic growth, I mean, if you look at Japan, right? So Japan hasn't had economic growth in 20 years, right? So their GDP in 1990 is exactly the same as their GDP is today in 2020, right? That's because they've had numerous deflationary spirals that forced their economy to basically not grow. And I think that's what I'm saying. Like, if you can say, look, we should be like the Japanese. We should have basically net 0% inflation over the last 20 years, and then also have net zero growth and have basically very marginal gains in productivity or output or whatever.
The quality of life in Japan is about the same as 20 years ago.
So
yeah.
No. Well, I mean, I don't think you said the quality of life. It's just the output, right? Like, you know.
Well, I mean, the two are kind of related, but yeah.
Well, one measures the other, doesn't it?
No.
China probably has a lot of output, but a low quality of life.
Like, there's so many factors. Like, you know, what part of the class hierarchy are you in?
Wait, the two things I was going to say, like, you guys were saying about my statement about the alternate history is just, if you take a lesson from the Great Depression and you say, okay, in order to avoid this deflationary spiral, we have to increase lending a whole bunch, right? Like, the whole economic system is super complex, and that rule of increase lending is only true in so much as, like, today's situation exactly mimics what happened back then. And you won't be able to know what all the consequences are of the differences.
You can't run the experiment with the same initial conditions again.
Exactly, yeah. And the second...
Disagree. I think you can... Well, I'll let you finish. Go ahead.
I mean, you're talking about
the second one was just that it's someone in in the government or however you want to structure it, is making a value decision of this person's business not getting deflated is more important than the person's savings in the bank. And there's all sorts of like high level bureaucratic evil there where they're not, people are getting screwed just because some guy made that decision and had no control over their life of the little guy.
I agree. I agree. It's a political trade-off. I 100% agree with you. But I will say that trade-off is the reason why we lean towards inflation is because the system demands it. That's what I'm saying. So that's what I'm saying. Like, you're basically confronting this gargantuan monster that we call fractional reserve banking and all, the whole rest of it that follows.
Have we lost control of the system?
Pretty much.
Did we ever have control of it? Who would control it other than, certain
We've lost
barons
control of the system if you don't like printing money. If you don't like printing money, but we're in this.
I don't think we've lost control of the system. I think it's just that it was decided at some point
because it demands it. That doesn't sound like we're in control.
Here.
Well, no, what I'm saying is
because
that
you don't like printing money, so it.
No. Paymon.
This is who controls the system.
No, but Paymon.
Look at that necklace. Look at that.
Yeah, that necklace definitely is like some kind of radio for like the fucking the fleet to arrive at any moment in time. Like to just
come on, what is up with that?
Adrian, so Paymon is assuming that if you have to print money, you've lost control of the system.
You're not supposed to showboat.
No. What I'm saying is that what Paymon, like, this is what's actually being said.
Anyway,
if you take the Austrian framework and the Austrian theory of how, for example, we should only have a global gold standard, and thus economic growth is contingent in our ability to attract gold reserves, and thus there's this bias towards higher interest rates because that's how you get capital inflows and so on and so forth. Like, we tried that, right? So when we tried that, it didn't work. It was a bad system. People's lives were miserable. We had consistent bank runs. Every 7 years, we had a panic of whatever. And we had a consistent deflationary spirals, and the Federal Reserve was created as a political response to the fact that that system was out of control.
We still have that, though.
Yeah, but it's not nearly as bad. And it's like the downside.
We definitely smoothed it out. Like, we don't have the Great Recession was the first major recession in like a century.
Yeah. Think about that for a second. It used to happen every 7 years.
I think the average is still that.
The what? Who?
No, I mean, yes, there are recessions every 7 years, but we're talking about like major deflationary events
the first one
every 7 years versus like there's a recession which is a slowdown in growth, and then the government like props things up.
That's true. Didn't we have the brick and mortar versus .com bubble stuff?
No, right? that wasn't major, guys. That was like over in like a couple of months.
Yeah,
Like, that was like, we didn't have the 10%, 11% unemployment we did in the 2008 crisis. Like,
is that when MySpace and Friendster died, or no? That was later. So well. What?
Seems major to me because it sticks out in memory so well.
Oh,
that's because you're a computer programmer. A lot of people who worked in your industry and before you lost money.
I was 8 in 2000.
Yeah, but my point is like you've heard those stories. Like, it was everybody's startup was failing in the 90s because people were calling bullshit.
I don't know anyone who had a startup in .com.
No, I'm not. Okay, whatever.
He was part of the startup scene when he was 8 years old. It was a different time.
Like, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get Mike to confess that he has a problem with the system as a whole and not just this like sub school that's like trying to analyze how.
I don't think it's a problem with the system as a whole.
I have a problem with the system as a whole. I think it's unsustainable.
Mike, do you accept that the system requires that you print money?
I'm worried that we're headed there.
No, but I think
but you don't accept the notion that the last century.
You just made the point that the system requires the expansion of the money supply. That's how we have growth. So it's not even like a matter of where we're headed there for like a century.
Look, you can take a very strong pro-free market position here and say, look, I think only private banks should be allowed to create credit. You can do that. You can be like, only private commercial banks can create credit. But then you still come up with the problem of fractional reserve banking, which is that at some point you're going to have a bank run. What do you do in the bank run?
Yeah, I don't disagree that, fractional reserves, man, we've been doing that for a couple centuries now. I'm worried about normalizing within the political culture printing money.
Wait, so you're worried about so you're worried about normalizing what we already do?
Yeah.
Like, no, in the political consciousness.
And just among the politicians, the political
consciousness.
Like I was saying, if it's an existential threat, print the money away, whatever. Like if we're not going to be here in 10 years.
If you don't, then do it.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm worried about it becoming used for trivial things.
It's just like talking about torturing people to try to prevent terrorism or to get intel. You're like, well, what if there was a nuke in the middle of New York City and this one Arab guy happened to be the only one, and you had the guy from 24 and he had him tied to a chair and he just started beating on him. It would be okay suddenly. And you're kind of like, well, if all that was really happening, then I think we would later, after the fact, we would figure it out. Like, you shouldn't make a law saying, well, it's okay to torture under these special circumstances when there's
Yeah, but I just think that the problem with thinking that way is that the money printing is going to happen no matter what we in this virtual conference call think or say.
So
and
is
to me,
child prostitution and stuff. It
no, right.
But
what I'm saying is that
okay, a little bit.
No, But what I'm not saying is it's right for that reason. What I'm saying is that it's gonna happen. It's been happening, and the real question for me is how endogenous is the system. And what I'm saying is that I think that it's totally endogenous. Like you will not have growth without increasing the money supply. And I'd rather have a system of public credit where the Federal Reserve can just issue money and funds to be able to purchase government bonds, and just leave it to private banks and then have a bank run every 7 years. That is that's chaos to me. Like, I'd rather smooth out economic growth over the course of half century and have.
But smooth means that you print it maybe when the economy's growing, and then during the contraction phase, you have to get a bunch of money together and burn it in a big pile like you're the Joker.
Or you could tax the rich.
But tax the rich to get the money back and then burn that.
No, yeah, because when you taxing can be a way to control inflation, but you'll.
I'm not a fan. Yeah, like that's true, but I'm generally not a fan of using that as a inflation fighting measure.
Taxing the rich.
Yeah, I think you
tax the rich. Tax the poor.
I think you tax the rich to fight.
They can't complain. Until they get the pitchforks.
Yeah.
Wait, what'd you say, Adrian?
I think taxing the rich is really should be used primarily to fight inequality, not to fight inflation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that would be, yeah.
Or just because it feels good.
I would tax the shit out of Elon Musk. I'm sorry.
He's said enough stupid things about coronavirus that I'm just backing off. I don't care.
He said enough stupid things with no qualifiers on the.
Yeah. Like, I just want someone to come up to Elon Musk's house and be like, all right, half of your wealth is now expropriated under the federal government.
Guys, read the title of this.
Yeah, I saw this.
Does everybody know about this? He named his kid XAA12.
Yeah. Actually, I saw a really funny here, Paul.
He's doing way too much acid, dude.
They really are.
What the fuck?
Paul, go on the Facebook group chat. I just sent a picture that actually explains the whole thing.
1 sec.
It's actually quite funny.
Pull up the other browser window. One sec. You can always drop it in the chat in Zoom.
Oh, true. The thing is, it's on my phone. That's why.
Oh, I got you. Okay, sorry. One sec here.
Wow, that's unironically the reason.
That what?
They're just like on too much drugs.
Oh, that is actually, he said it? Is that what you put in the group chat? Okay,
Grimes'
that's amazing.
tweet explaining what the name means, and it's just you're on drugs. That's what that is.
There is such as too much. Hey, I think we should talk about MMT with respect to Corona-chan. But I mean, not even just Corona-chan as an existential threat, but the Corona-chan, post-Corona-chan world. What is that? Is that going to be a world where suddenly governments have more control over everything, and so printing money seems like less of a slight against the little man or something?
They're not, because they don't even insist that they own shares in these large companies when they give them all this money.
I mean, China's the future. I'm just going to say that. China's the future. China's the future. The CCP has proven itself as the only competent
I see why
political organization in the world.
This money. That makes more sense now.
And I don't agree with them. I think the political censorship and all that, undemocratic, blah, 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 human rights abuses, blah, 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 blah.
I think Star Trek went many seasons after introducing the Borg, and they never took over. Never mind.
What?
Never mind.
That's why you studied physics.
No, Paul. It's also just the infrastructure that China's laying out. I mean, they're gonna have access to all. Like, first of all, their economy is gonna double by like 2050 or whatever. But they're gonna have access to like most of the resources in Africa and India.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to find this tweet. You said China is? Yeah, because they aren't all concerned with like
a lot of
human rights and all this weird stuff that keeps
stopping
stopping us.
All these liberal Western values.
I know, yeah. You can't have 11-year-olds working at a factory all day and stuff.
Well, to be fair, they don't really have that anymore.
They're making good sense on the day or whatever. They don't have child labor?
In China, it's not really, not anymore.
What, in China, just what? No,
I'm serious, not anymore. Like that's a very old.
I guess I don't want to talk about my.
Here it is. Here it is. Here's the Grimes tweet.
I think they have their own problems. Everybody knows about the ghost cities and stuff like that, but it's happening
this is
everywhere, right? It's like you're a government official and you get put in charge of the province, and they say increase GDP by 5%, right? And
figure it out.
Right, and so what they do is they'll take out a whole bunch of loans for the province and build factories that aren't being used, roads, highways, the ghost cities, and GDP goes up by 5%, and they get promoted and sent to somewhere else, higher position or Beijing, and the province still has to pay back all the debt. And
I mean, I'd say that that concern is honestly saying that you've created too many houses in a world where the United States still has 500,000 homeless people. I'm okay with that, to be honest. I think that
China has homeless people too.
It's definitely an inefficient use.
No, China, the homeless population. Look it up right now. The homeless
it's definitely inefficient.
Statistics coming out of China.
Well, it's definitely an inefficient use of capital, and they shouldn't do it. But I don't think that means that they're going to have problems projecting power, which is sort of what I'm talking about in terms of the relative power that they have so when we're saying the CCP is going to rule, as in China's going to be more powerful in a lot of ways than the United States right now, and it's just
they've already surpassed
whether they're building shitty infrastructure at home or not, they're going to have they're just going to have financial interest in the entire global South, essentially. That's going to give them a lot of bargaining power.
Honestly, I'm a lot less worried about China taking over than I am about people thinking it's inevitable that China will take over and then setting themselves up accordingly.
Yeah, I think it's not inevitable.
Yeah, no. It's not.
What do you mean by taking over, I guess?
That's a
Becoming
good
the
question.
dominant superpower in the world.
There you go.
Yeah.
So what is that? What does that actually mean to you?
Well, to me, what it means is like China has already surpassed us in GNI. So that's one. Number two, I would say is that the Chinese economic model of basically taking a country that goes from 80% absolute poverty to a country that is
Chinese
gnocchi. Well, I mean, actually, by the way, all Italian food comes from China. So
most
fucking
it's not.
yes, there it is. Yeah, it goes national.
So that's what that stands for.
So I like, for me, the question is, are Latin American and African countries that are seeking to have high amounts of growth, are they going to look to the United States as a model, or are they going to look to China as the model? And I think that China has the more compelling story. They've wiped out absolute poverty. Shanghai has the exact same HDI as Italy. Okay, so
you know they sell organs.
Not only that, like the way the IMF and World Bank function actually just like
they steal the organs of dissidents
and
then
slavery.
Exactly. I mean,
the highest bidder.
It is meant to keep countries in debt. Like if you just
China
look
does that too, though, and that's an old move. It's called a debt trap, and the superpower comes along and says, "Oh, little country, like let's bribe your elites to buy this thing, right?" And the elites are like, "Oh yeah, we could use that," and then when they have to pay back the debt to the big superpower. And they're like, all right,
and then they can't, and then the superpower gets more of their resources. China's going to do the exact same thing, but like China's willing to do more than the United States is to be in that position. Like they're willing to build more infrastructure. Because remember, like America, I think in the 1960s made it so that basically they can subsidize their agriculture and feed a whole bunch of countries around the world.
Right, but China's also doing. Sorry,
no,
I just dropped something in the chat if you want to.
So I'm just saying China's doing the same thing by developing a lot of these countries. They're developing markets for their exports, so it's worth it too.
Oh, I dropped the link in the chat.
I see it. I got it.
Does that make sense?
Yes, and I agree with you.
It's more worth it for China to invest in these large infrastructure progress to create markets for their exports than it is for America to do so, especially because their main thing is manufacturing. And that's what's going to give them like superpower status.
Well, we'll see if that continues like after all the Corona stuff.
Well, that's exactly my point, is that the United States is such an outlier in how badly we're doing in terms of the coronavirus.
China's manufacturing.
Oh, China's just lying.
China's manufacturing is going to be
over a million people are this. China's doing terribly with coronavirus. I know authoritarian lockdown, all that stuff, but I don't want to reveal too much about
a million people. I mean, really,
it is shut down. Like from the south to the north, the whole country.
But that's the point
bad.
of a pandemic.
Right.
That's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Okay. You're saying it's good that they coordinated a complete national shutdown like that.
Yeah. Yes. I think, and not only do I think it's a good thing, I think
they call it the American virus in a lot of places where they're continuing to have outbreaks. Have you seen this? Here, let's watch. Let's click through some Wuhan flu subreddit stuff here.
Dude, that sounds awesome.
God, subreddits.
It's a quarantine subreddit too. I think I'd have to log in order
to. Good lord.
Wuhan flu. I'm gonna look at it too.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic. This is the only place to get good.
Mike, I'm saying like China's model requires neocolonialism for them to grow, and that's why they're going to become superpower. Their economic model dictates that they create these export markets.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that or their motivations there. Just I don't know if all the manufacturing will stay in China.
No, but it doesn't have to.
It's not going to. It doesn't.
It's not going to. It doesn't have to. Like you already see, like Ethiopia right now. They just built. This Chinese company just built a mega factory in Addis Ababa. It's like I think it's like something like 5,000, 6,000 employees in a single facility. Doing low-level textile manufacturing to be able to then do high fashion branding in China. Like China's already outsourcing the low-level manufacturing stuff because they've outlived that. They've outgrown it.
That's baseline capitalism. Shit-eating capitalism.
Like if you look up China's labor costs and their wages, like it's literally just an upward. It's like they basically did what the United States did during the Industrial Revolution. They just time warped it to like last half a century.
Yeah.
Let's look at the top stuff from. They've been quarantined like the Donald. Wuhan flu. It's got the underscore and all the things with the underscore now. That's like the Donald. Yeah. One sec. Let's look at some top posts.
I don't know if it's just my connection, but the video is all pixelated for me.
Yeah, I'm same here.
Yeah, me too.
Might be my connection. That might be the. Here, let's see if.
Yeah, I can't reach it.
Is it looking? Oh, whoops, too much.
Yeah,
better.
Yeah. No, you gotta zoom in more than that.
More?
Yeah. There you go. That's so. Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
Here, wait. How about that? We'll do that.
Sure.
Yeah, that's good.
Sure.
That's good.
Township police believe 2 men.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This subreddit's very pro-Trump. This one.
So you just hope that China's practice of neocolonialism won't be as rapacious as the French, the Americans, and the British have been in Africa?
Oh, no, it'll be... Wait, it'll be worse.
I think it'll be...
No. What?
So, okay.
China let the actual Africans say this. Go, Edwin.
Dude,
all right,
okay.
Go.
So people don't know how bad this is.
Can you shame Chinese people into not horribly abusing another ethnicity?
Okay, can I say
go ahead.
something, Paul? So there's this currency called the CFA franc, where all French countries, former French colonies, use the same currency to exchange among each other in the region. So that currency is backed by the franc, right? So the reserves.
No, by the euro.
Oh yeah, now by the euro.
Yeah.
But they get paid. Like they have to get, in order to get the backing, they have to pay France 50% of the reserves every year.
Mm-hmm.
Guys, are you hearing this?
There's a currency used by a bunch of African nations?
I dropped the link. I dropped the link, Paul.
Oh, sure. All right. Let's see it.
Okay, so they're guaranteed by the French Treasury.
Like this is literally the most garbage system. There's this. This
they literally are stealing money, and they kill presidents who try to get rid of it. They've
no. It's so bad. Like this economist from Senegal did a presentation at this conference that I was in New York City, and he was just like describing it. I'm like, this is literally the worst thing I've ever heard in my life.
It's crazy because people think like a lot of the reasons Africans haven't developed is because of race. People have racist reasons for thinking that Africa hasn't developed. And obviously when you're going from, a society where a lot of people don't have writing and stuff like that to trying to industrialize, you're going to have a lot of problems. But the colonial powers have actually worked to keep those countries down, like quite literally. I know it sounds like something like, and I mean, through colonialism and through neocolonialism.
Are you saying China wouldn't do that?
I'm saying they won't.
They're not doing that.
I'm saying they're not doing it now.
Yeah.
And it may not be as bad.
They're not.
Maybe, but it's really bad. Like what they're doing now is
this
like
is also
Liberians,
China now versus this is the
franc
was in 1945.
But literally, America caused a civil war in Liberia. So like I don't know how much worse it can get.
No. Like you guys are either severely underestimating how bad the Western powers have treated the African continent, or you're like way too cynical about the Chinese.
I'm very cynical about.
I'm just saying, like how much?
Second one.
Paul, how much worse does it get than a 14? How much worse does it get than a 14-year civil war?
Yeah.
Well, they could turn you into Soylent Green. I mean, that's China. There's
No, but the thing is, like, this is.
What happened to not Tibet? There's like a few other places in the south of China that China just took over, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The past 30 years. Isn't that worse than civil war, where you just like give up and like lose?
No, I agree.
This is what China's doing. I just dropped a link.
Tibet,
I mean,
like
they're
China's
sending
relationship with
because
Tibet
they
is
can't
gonna
get a
be
handle
different
on
from
this
a lot of other
this
countries,
disease
just
that they
inherently.
created by having terrible quality assurance practices in their laboratories. This disease created by China. Now, because of that disease, they're now having to send Uyghurs. These are Muslims, right? They hate Muslims. It's an ethnic group as well. They're sending them into factories to make products even more poorly than the Chinese already make products. They're sending them in, and then they get sick after 2 weeks. They're just going through them.
Paul, I'm pretty sure epidemiologists have already debunked the fact that it was man-made.
It's no. They probably passed.
No, they haven't.
They have definitely not debunked it.
They have not.
Yeah, they looked into the genetic structure. I'm pretty sure, and they were like, "This does not look man-made."
Very easily
there was an article.
There's a biolab in China where they're studying bat coronaviruses. They put out an ad in November for a specialist in bat coronaviruses. It's 15 miles from the site.
There's the December thing too.
No, they were
telling me.
But that doesn't necessarily mean man-made. That can mean it was an accident while they're studying it. But
it was man-made and released by an accident.
No, I don't.
It would be released by accident.
We have to, after the fact, you gotta send me some sources.
They're good at PR either. I don't know why people
Adrian, I will send you some sources on this. Like, actually,
because
like the NIH literally funded gain of function mutation.
Oh, here you go. So this is actually what I was saying, Paul.
Like,
this is the kind of colonialism that China's doing, right? So they're employing 20,000 Ethiopians to work at a factory. Basically,
that sounds like China. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is superior to the way the West treated the African continent as just a giant extraction of resources.
Right.
And
well,
so
with the West, what they would
Africa now, which is still bad, but
really bad,
anyways.
Actually.
Yeah,
really bad.
I mean,
still functionally the same in a lot of ways, but with the West, instead of them coming and building a factory where a bunch of Africans would work, what they would do is put your government in debt so that they can get the best deal to your corporations, who will come in many cases, bring their own people to do the work and just extract the resources. It's not about building local capacity at all. And the interesting thing about it is that's they don't see themselves as bad people because it's not part of their theory of how development happens. It's happened from a purely capitalist framework where, like, if I bring money into your society, you're better off. Therefore, that's all I have to do is bring money into your society.
You're describing the Chinese
in exchange for organs.
No. The Americans, actually.
Oh, the Americans. Okay. I was like, okay.
It's like,
yeah, no, because the thing is, the Chinese are actually building shit. Like, they built that railroad that I showed you from Kenya to.
I wouldn't trust it.
They're also building factories in Ethiopia. Like, Ethiopia is the only country of, like, I think 4, including Rwanda and Ghana, that basically met the World Bank's goal of poverty reduction. You know what I mean? And that was partly due to Chinese investment. So, like, my point is, like, there's a lot of American reasons to be against China, and I know, Paul, you're very American. So not to say that you're completely biased.
We've committed genocide.
Not to say you're completely biased. But
I'm not like we're perfect.
But I would say that your image of China, I feel, is a little outdated.
Cultural.
I think it's just my opinion is that that's like a very optimistic view of China. Like, you're comparing what they're doing a few years into building their colonial network versus the end state of all the Western colonialism.
No, Mike, I'm not saying that China is not going to exert fucked up influence when they have enough power.
Yeah, I'm not claiming that.
I'm arguing
like all I'm saying
in ways
I'm saying
imagine.
That it's not necessarily way more fucked up if you look at, like, it
what
could
they currently
be,
have done.
But
maybe
it could be, but if you look at
like
the way
just,
Chinese people
just
behave
just,
when they take over.
Just
a
literally
country
like
and they,
any president who like takes loans from the Soviet Union or sends students to the Soviet Union, they just assassinate them. Right? I mean, literally, just for decades, they just did that. If you
sorry, who are we talking about?
That's what the U.S.
The
did.
U.S. government.
Right. Again, we also genocided an entire people. Like,
so,
but
so, I mean,
who does it worse? Who did it worse, the West or China?
Centuries.
So far, the West is like overwhelmingly winning that.
Overwhelmingly worse.
Right.
Like,
okay, if you're talking about, like Mike was saying, the very beginning of Chinese colonialism compared to the whole of Western colonialism.
Okay, well then let's wait and see.
No, but Paul, even, like their incentives, and their ideological framework for what the interaction should be like are actually better for the African countries.
Yes.
Like just like
right.
like how they think.
We're gonna
because they have more experience.
70 years or so. We're gonna see how this plays out. So
no, they have more experience.
China still has the lingering Maoism of third world unity and this concept of like the fucking minorities of the planet have to stand against the Western imperialism. Like they still, the West had a strictly social Darwinist, racist, like we must basically just exploit these people.
Dude, abolitionism started in the West. There's lots of
sure.
Well, no, we're not saying
eventually came up with the solution to the fuckery.
We're not arguing that there's like
not
ideological homogeneity.
Yeah.
We're not arguing that there are ideological homogeneity. We're just saying if you look at certain systems in the West, like the ones that abolitionism showed up to oppose, but like largely push a lot of how the economy functions.
saying a place like
if you
China,
look at those systems, they're rapacious.
Marx was German. I'm pro-West, all right?
Yeah.
Right, and
I'm pro-West. I think China does horrible things, but that's not the point I'm trying to make.
Like if we're being objective here, like so far it's not that bad, you know?
It's gonna get worse in many ways, but the point is like if you look at what their motives are, it's unlikely. If you look at their see you, Payman.
Yeah, I'll take off in a little bit too. We've been talking for like 2 hours at this point.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, it's probably just, a good time soon.
If you look at their ideological framework for how development happens, Paul, it's just like a lot better in the West. That's all I'm saying.
It's probably more straightforward. That might be
part
of
it's
it.
Actually
but a lot of what we were doing at the beginning of Western colonialism had like a whole like weird missionary, like convert the natives, all this weird kind of, I mean, it wasn't, capitalism was just kind of starting to be a thing that we sat and picked apart, and codified and talked about. Now it's definitely like, it is now it's kind of like what we were saying where like you can't redo the experiment and we just swap it out with Chinese people. Like there's, you know what I mean? Starting from now, we're later in the system. Capitalism is developed. We've seen a lot of problems with it and stuff like that. But it's not like the East India Company or something.
But you're ignoring what Edwin's saying about the actual ideological compositions and the motivations. So like the fact that China has that underpinning of like Maoist third worldism is.
But do you think they actually care about that, or they're just doing what the politicians want?
Actually,
no, man.
No,
if you actually
read,
look at like, what Xi Jinping.
If you look at Chinese politics, like outside of like the Western media framework, you'll see immediately that that's like a strong element of Chinese political culture.
Like
I work with a lot of Chinese.
It's laced in a lot of their rhetoric. I'm not saying they don't want to just make money. Like they're like everybody else trying to make money. It's just like their theory of how development actually works.
Like Xi Jinping released his reading list, right? And like half of the books there was basically like either Chinese. Listen to me though. Half the reading list was like Chinese.
Release state propaganda. Go on.
No. It was mostly like Chinese literature, and then there was a couple of things there, a political theory, including, for example, stuff by like Henry George, right? So famously Georgism and stuff like. Freaking they had a couple of like neo-Maoist political theorists on there as well. Like this is a guy who does take theory seriously. You could be super cynical and say it's all just material motivations, but if you know anything about human beings, you know that it's more complex than that, right? Like it's never just only material motivation.
I don't think that any politician really sticks to an ideological belief. They're doing what they need to do politically and then justify it after the fact to the people using the ideological framework.
I feel
when
that
you're
way
a
about
dictator,
MMT.
when you're a dictator, you can be more ideological than if you're a democratic politician.
That's true, right? Is it? I mean, that's probably. So you're saying because it's a dictatorship, it'll be better for Africa.
Well, it's not a dictatorship, but yeah.
Yes, come on. I mean, what?
It's not.
He's like the head of
not.
every
You're right. It's
committee
actually
besides the-
communist. It's Marxist.
It's not a dictatorship.
He has people he's accountable to.
Yeah, like the Chinese political system is a little more complicated than that. Like,
the way
you have
that
the
like
PLA,
Putin
you have the
is accountable to the
Politburo. Like
oligarchs,
it's not.
I'm saying it's good. We're not saying it's.
Yeah, I'm not
preferable.
endorsing
just
it.
saying
I'm just not saying it's a dictatorship.
It's not like what you would classically.
It sounds like you're endorsing it above, like the West.
No, I'm saying it's not a dictatorship.
No.
They're both doing terrible things, but China's probably going to do way worse.
No,
you don't know that.
What I'm saying is. I'm
saying under the West's framework, if they did what they wanted to do, if they did what they aspired to do, which in most cases they didn't, but if they did what they aspired to do, countries would still not develop. Whereas like under the Chinese framework, they would. Like the only reason South Korea developed as fast as they did, the country of South Korea got more aid from the United States than all of Africa combined.
Not only that, but we actually bought their goods. We're like, we'll buy from Hyundai. We'll buy from Samsung.
South Korea got a bunch of aid from China? That's why they did well?
No, from the U.S.
Oh, okay. All right. That makes a lot more sense. I'm aware of that. Yeah.
I'm saying
and North Korea is the Chinese model. There you go.
No,
Chinese propped up.
No.
They just did it so that there was a buffer between them and South Korea. So people wouldn't notice how good South Korea was. They just put North Korea, they just kept this block right there.
Well, you know what's interesting about what you're saying, Paul, is that actually North Korea, for the first 20 years after the Korean War, was actually economically superior to South Korea.
They were just great.
It was economically superior to South Korea. It was better than South Korea. And then South Korea surpassed it.
I'm glad we're going to end on this note. Because it makes.
Look, you don't have to endorse every aspect of another system to be able to recognize when some things are true or false. Like I'm not saying that
Hugo
I
Boss,
agree with North
Nazi
Korea
fashion. Totally.
I don't take
sexy stuff. Like and that was innovative, right?
Paul,
way before. Who was wearing stuff like that?
Paul, who built the Autobahns in Germany?
Are you gonna say Hitler did that too?
Yes.
I don't actually know.
Hitler built.
Okay.
I'm serious.
Man.
Hitler's militarization wiped
what have
out
the Romans
unemployment.
ever done for us, right?
Again, my only point in saying all those things
you're right.
is
As
that
long as you're not a Jew or gay or a gypsy or
you don't gotta endorse the system to be able to recognize
look at Hitler wrong.
Well, AJ, don't you see? If you say Hitler's militarization wiped out unemployment, then you're clearly endorsing the Holocaust.
If you Soylent Green everyone else, then you can wipe out unemployment. You just take all the unemployed people and feed them to the rest of the population. That's how that works.
I don't consider a country to be ideologically strong if they don't let their citizens go on the internet and see that side world.
I'm not saying that
they locked it down
extra
strong. Recently. Well,
they're saying
so much about
their framework for development, from going from absolute poverty to an acceptable standard of living, is just better than what the West has had for the past 2 years.
Before
60 million people died.
Reading list and the ideology
forward.
Yeah, but they're not trying to implement the Great
people
Leap
died
Forward
during the industrialization of America and
far less than 60 million.
No, if you actually take into account, since the start of colonial
million people in
colonial America, till the point where we are today,
the whole long path.
Yeah, because the Great Leap Forward. Listen. This is what I'm saying. Like the reason why the Leninist model of development was particularly deadly was because it was essentially time warping the Industrial Revolution, something that Europe and the United States took 200 years. They tried to do it in 10 years, in 15 years.
They did it having a blueprint. And they just said, we do this fast. And then
Look up Gosplan.
What's it called?
You never did.
Gosplan.
Letting 1,000 flowers bloom.
Wait, I'm sorry.
Right?
Say that again, Mike.
The incident where the speech did the 1,000 flowers, like let 1,000 flowers bloom, where he's like, you can, publish all your thoughts. And they went around and rounded up anything that said critical of the communist government and killed them.
Yeah, that was cynical. That was definitely cynical.
I think that's more than cynical. That's psychotic. That's something we haven't done, right?
Well,
yeah.
J. Edgar Hoover was a particularly violent
so many
FBI
organs.
director.
Hoover, he had like a whole.
There's just so many governments that America has overthrown, and so many people.
I know. Okay.
America
well,
has fucked that America just had no idea. I'm talking about dozens of societies all around the world.
I'm team America needs to, at the very least,
from
become
slavery
a social
to
democracy.
Epstein.
That's where
America has a thread of just horrendous evil running through it.
But just like the fact, just the fact that America subsidizes this agriculture and forces all these countries around the world. Like, yes, China's doing it now.
That's
but
the more evil thing? Or is it because
you don't understand the impact of that?
It starves people? Is that part of it?
It's not starving people.
What's it?
It's not starving people. It's taking like there was a point in which okay, so this is a great example.
I thought we did that because of nukes, because we were worried there would be like
Can we do last words too? Because I also gotta go.
Okay.
Okay.
This has been awesome though.
Yeah, it's been very good.
Let me give you one example, right? So Firestone came to Liberia.
This is rubber, right?
Yeah, because British had a monopoly on rubber in Liberia. Not in globally, so the U.S. needed to get its own rubber.
Mm-hmm.
So they're building Firestone. When they came, they couldn't get enough laborers, right? So
did they cut off people's hands or something? Because I know
No, they were initially they were trying to get the government to stop or get certain private individuals to stop exporting laborers to South America so they can use that labor in Liberia. But ultimately, what they did is when they couldn't get enough labor until the U.S. started subsidizing and exporting all their rice. So, and then they came on the radio and advertised to the illiterate people that, oh, you don't want Liberian grown rice. They call it country rice. You want the rice from the more developed countries. So all of a sudden, demand for Liberian rice collapsed. And that was maybe 30, 40% of the population that worked in. And those people went to work in rubber. And then what they also did, they made it so that they said, if you grow rubber in Liberia, we'll buy. So the people who could grow rubber in Liberia were the elites. All of a sudden, they aligned their interests so they could keep labor costs low, right?
Is this neoliberal, this kind of practice of going around?
This is like a combination.
I hate that shit too, man. Don't worry.
It's a combination of colonialism and neo-colonialism. But this is something
neo-colonial. Okay.
They wrote about it, right? It was we're going to what we want to do is have these countries sell us their products in exchange for our high-tech products. So that's their natural. So they're setting it up so that's all those countries can do and not move up the ladder. Literally, we had a president who was this is fucked up. We're going to grow our own rice.
Did he get killed? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it always ends with someone dying.
Yeah.
This is arguing about the current president.
I mean, think about this is literally what America fought a war to prevent, which is Britain just dominating their commerce.
Right. Yeah.
That's what America has done to dozens of countries all around the world.
Our real dream was to get powerful enough to turn around and do some horrendous abusing of other nations.
That's why I don't think it will be all sunshine and rainbows with China, because inevitably the imperial power acts that way, regardless of people.
It's going to be a Chinese King Leopold.
Before that happens,
can you imagine a Chinese King Leopold?
Yep.
There will be trains. There'll be literal train connections between Addis Ababa and Kinshasa.
Yeah.
Right. That's going to be a thing in the middle.
They're going to make super highways.
Jungle. They're going to be so we're going to have a lot of that infrastructure. So even if there's some tension,
like markets are going to be integrated. It's going to be possible to have larger like currency bases. Is going to be possible. Like if we have larger currency bases, right? If Nigeria does a really good job, it's easier, like in their agricultural sector, moving to the point where we have a sovereign currency is easier because they can supply the rest of Africa.
And then that actually leads to the second phase, which is which would be like dislodging themselves from the Chinese economic imperialism, and
that's going to be messy.
It's going to be messy, but
it's going to be messy. But that's
they'll be better position to do it because they'll actually have something. There'll be some material development.
Right.
Hopefully.
But the last thing I'll say is this: I'm pro West. I just want the United States to, at the very least, implement a minimum social democratic program. That would be nice. I think that we're wealthy enough where we could actually provide healthcare and
I agree.
Education and all that shit to everybody, and also to revolutionize our energy infrastructure to move towards renewable energy and something a little more high tech. Like, I think that that's the minimum we can do.
I think if America is smart, they would like build infrastructure in poor parts of the world, green infrastructure.
If we're smart in the long term,
I think it would be like it's such an obvious win. Like you could create so many jobs for your people going over there and doing that. The soft power, the like,
I'll also say
climate change.
I'll also say that if I ever end up becoming Supreme Leader of the United States, you're all invited to become part of my state planning committee of right? So, you'll all be invited to the American Goss plan.
I'm so down.
Yeah. Oh, I know. It literally isn't. Hey guys, so I was like, oh, I think I found toilet paper on Amazon. That's like, and they have like, I think, what is this? 10 rolls. They're like 10 whole rolls. Look at how tiny these are. That's like the size of my fist. There's nothing. They're probably 1 ply or something. Anyway, so it's the only one. 10 rolls at that price seems somewhat reasonable, and it's not. That's the tiniest little.
It's inflation.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
It is inflation.
You've debased my toilet paper.
All right, guys. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Adrian.
It's fun.
That was great. Until next time.
All right.
Bye, guys.
See you, Mike.